Shalom and welcome to the Messianic Torah Observer podcast program. I'm Rod Thomas, your host, and as always, it is my hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. We also trust that you had a meaningful and blessed Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread. We, Hillary and I, had a great week, which included our QFC Live Sabbaths and Holy Week live stream discussions and teachings for the week. And yes, we were brazen enough to launch the live streaming arm of this ministry, during the Passover Holy Week. Period. And despite the immense learning curve it took to get to any semblance of a decent broadcast and post, I think we made out all right. We still have some tweaking and adjustments and learning to do as it relates to the ins and outs of live streaming to kind of get it down and perfect it, as well as to enhance some of the video quality and insets and things that we're still working on bringing on as we move along in the history of this program. But we're working on that, and we've got great plans ahead for expanding that as well. But we were led by Abba to provide this weekly resource to you. So the many challenges we faced in the midst of putting this live stream into action is well worth it. And I would even go so far to say it is well worth your time to fellowship with us every Friday evening at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is the beginning of the Sabbath. And I am telling you, I bet you it'd be worth your time. So think about it. And if it works for you, we invite you to go ahead and check that out. We're on 3 streaming platforms. The Messianic Torah Observer, I'll get to that in our housekeeping here real quick. But the other thing is that we received some awesome teachings and fellowship from the brethren at Feast Keepers out of New York during the week as well. So we fed and we got fed. So it was a great Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover week. So we love the feast. That's what it's all about. And it was a tremendous time to be had by all. Beyond all of this, our next feast of the biblical calendar year is Shavuot, more famously known as Pentecost. And it will hit on May 31st. As you no doubt know, Shavuot or Pentecost is a high holy day, marking the end of the spring feast of Yehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, and ushering in a 3-month quiet period before the fall feast. So that's the feast situation for this calendar year so far. But today's content is entitled The Mark of the Beast. What are you going to do when they come for you? I know that probably sounds familiar to most of you, but it has to do, this post today has to do with the current worldwide health situation, which will remain nameless for this post. But what I want to bring to light this evening is a very disturbing proposal that has been recently making its way around mainstream news platforms and some social media platforms in this country. And that has to do with citizens of our nation ultimately being forced to receive a vaccination and a tracking or mark that ensures the individual who has that mark has been vaccinated and is immune to the disease. And the question I will be proposing to you tonight is, if such a proposal does come to fruition, what are we? What are you? What are Jehovah's elect going to do? But before we get into the main content for this evening, allow me to dispense with a few housekeeping items. Our website is themessianictorahobserver.org, themessianictorahobserver.org, and there you will find not only this podcast program, but a great deal of other valuable resources and content that will enhance your walk with Messiah. You'll also find there the social media platforms and the various ways to contact us with your well-meaning and edifying comments and questions. There you'll also find the platform by which you may support this ministry. And you support this ministry in financial gifts and donations. And of course, we use PayPal and Patreon if you are so led. We also invite you to our weekly Sabbath live stream discussions and teaching. And you can find those hosted on our It's Not As You Perceive YouTube channel, as well as our It's Not As You Perceive Facebook page and the Messianic Torah Observer Facebook page. And of course, again, we live stream every Friday evening, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We would love to have you there. And if you're by some chance you can't catch it at that particular time for whatever reason, you can catch the upload, which will air usually about an hour or two after the live stream has completed and the system has had time to process the video. But that's it. So for housekeeping, that is. And with that, let's get into tonight's main content. I'll see you on the other side. And this is the mark of the beast. What are you going to do when they come for you? And we will apply the question of what are you going to do when they come for you to this present world health crisis. And I'm not so much interested in creating dialogue around what appears to be looming ahead in the coming months for every well-meaning Torah observant disciple in Yeshua Messiah. Instead, I'm interested in convincing every Torah observant disciple in Yeshua Messiah to start thinking and potentially start planning for what appears to be some dark days ahead for members of our beloved faith. And just to clarify, this is not a commentary on whether or not the present health crisis is real, whether or not it was intentionally created and spread by any government, whether or not our governments are properly handling the situation. That's a talk for another day, another platform. And I already did a post on my initial thoughts several weeks ago to this health crisis that if you're interested in checking it out, by all means do so. But it seems to me that most people have grown tired or weary about this type of this thing because that's all we get 24/7, it seems, on the news platforms, various news platforms and on social media. So I really don't want to focus on that, but really what I really want to look at tonight is this from a eschatological situation or perspective or standpoint. I recognize that there is something out there, and I've had distant members of my family as well as friends affected by this thing, but I also understand that this thing that is out there must be looked at by people of faith with a proper and balanced biblical, spiritual, and common sense perspective. And I'll just leave it at that. But according to stories, let's just say stories, attributed to Bill Gates, who of course is one of the founders of Microsoft, as well as the founder, along with his wife, of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who stated the following, quote, "Eventually we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it," end quote. Now, this quote came from Laura Ingram's interview with U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr on Fox News Channel. Essentially, Ingram asked Attorney Barr his opinion on implementing a tracking system in this country to track citizens who are immune to the virus, thus singling out those by default who cannot certify they have immunity. Now, I will say this, that since that has aired, there has been a lot of denial that Bill Gates ever made this statement. I don't know. All I know is that this is a quote. And it seems to have been attributed to Mr. Gates, but now the mainstream media is saying that, well, he never made such a statement. And I think maybe even Mr. Gates has even kind of said, well, I really didn't say that, or it was taken out of context. It's a lot of chaos around this, but, it is what it is. It was put out there. And if it wasn't true, there are a lot of people with power and authority in and around our government and in various nonprofit and for-profit organizations that do actually advocate this type of thing. So regardless of whether this is a true statement or not, or a true proposal coming from Mr. Gates, is somewhat of a moot point in a way, because there are a lot of people out there who have influence, who want to see this type of thing implemented. But such a thing as has been proposed by Mr. Gates, allegedly, becomes quite relevant to Bible believers who are familiar with the well-recognized prophecy of the mark of the beast, which is recorded in the book of Revelation. The Apostle John records, and he being the second beast, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And that is chapter 13 of the book of Revelation, verses 16 through 18. And I read to you the Sefer Bible version. So is a tracking system such as that which Bill Gates allegedly proposed and others like him proposed what this book of Revelation prophecy portends? Or am I overreacting to proposals that may or may not actually come to fruition? That's a question that only you can answer. I don't believe I'm overreacting. I think this is something that we've known most of our lives is coming. And now that we see all this stuff happening and the chaos that is brewing and stirring and happening around it all, I think this may have some legs to it. You see, there's absolutely no way that we can say that this present situation will lead to the ominous mark of the beast system that is described by John in the book of Revelation, with all transparency now. But biblically speaking, John's prophecy is not detailed enough to say with certainty, nor is there enough content given to the prophecy or in the prophecy to help us determine a solid nexus between this prophecy and, well, Bill Gates' alleged proposal. However, what the mark of the beast prophecy does do is it provides a stern warning to those for whom the revelation of Yahushua HaMashiach, the revelation of, and well, let's say Jesus Christ, which is well known throughout the world, but the book of Revelation was written to this, they that hear the words of this prophecy and guard those things which are written therein, Revelation 1:3. In other words, Mr. Gates' alleged proposal and others like him who are advocating such a thing may or may not be valid, as so many in mainstream media are trying to say was never given by Mr. Gates, or the words attributed to Mr. Gates was taken out of context. But a number of self-professing thinkers, as I said, are indeed proposing the same sort of thing that Mr. Gates is believed at one point to have proposed. And this being the case, then, it behooves us, Torah observant believers in Yeshua Messiah, to take a serious look at the Johannine prophecy, the book of Revelation prophecy of the mark of the beast, and determine for ourselves, what are we going to do when they, the powers that be, the power brokers, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, come for us with their tracking system and their vaccination and all of that stuff. Now, I contend that it further behooves the disciple of Messiah to determine which God he or she will serve, if indeed this proposal of a marking system or tracking system were to come to fruition. Will he or she bow or feel compelled to submit, bow down, or feel compelled to submit to the requirements of the God state, the nanny state, the global system, for whatever reasons, and get this tracker implanted somewhere in or on their person so that he or she may buy or sell? Or will he or she reject the tracking system at the expense of not being able to operate normally within the established commerce systems of this nation and the world, but remain true to their profession of faith? These are very serious questions, very sobering considerations. Most of us recognize the looming situation every Torah observant disciple of Yeshua Messiah is likely to face if such a mandated vaccination and tracking system were to be put in place in the Western nations of this world. I have come upon recent teachings on the subject of the mark of the beast that seems to have gotten a lot of traction of late. And under this recent teaching, those who receive the mark of the beast are believed to have received some form of alteration to their biological makeup that results in them becoming a hybrid of sorts, part human, part machine. But I'm wondering, with this latest threat of receiving some form of biological tracking element to prove immunity to the virus now being plastered throughout mainstream news and social media platforms throughout the West, if by chance the hybrid thinkers of this prophecy are maybe rethinking their hypotheses on the subject of the mark of the beast. You see, I've always believed that the mark of the beast would be some form of artificial marker placed either on or within the individual receiving the mark. And the only reason given by the beast government for the citizens of the world receiving that mark was to distinguish between those who would be loyal to the beast government from those who would not be loyal. Pretty simple equation. Now, I always had an uneasiness with this particular thinking and scenario, for I could not fathom how you convince a populace to have a mark of some type placed upon or in them for simply political purposes. You see, such a scenario would result in certain widespread uprisings and civil unrest. So no matter how popular a world leader may be to his or her citizens, there's always a good chunk of his or her population her citizenry that frankly can't stand them. So you'd have unrest. You'd have a lot of resistance. It would tear a nation apart just to place and enforce a mark or tracking system for political reasons. So the question always remained within me: how can the governments of the world convince millions of their citizens to acquiesce and freely receive the mark? Well, prior to this latest pandemic, if you will, I couldn't think of many valid scenarios where governments could easily and peaceably get their citizens to take a mark or submit to some tracking system that it would be put on or in their bodies. So when recent teachings of a hybrid causing mark caught my attention, I was open to buying into it. It said, that might work. That makes sense. Because that scenario seemed to solve the concerns I had regarding the political application of a mark. Essentially, the hybrid mark system would increase the quality and length of life of those who received it, according to this theory. In other words, under the hybrid mark system, people receiving the mark would become augmented in their ability to perform certain physical tasks, to hear and see without correction, to be physically stronger, to live several more years than they otherwise would, to ward off common debilitating diseases. Effectively, these would be superhuman beings. So those who don't get this mark, this hybrid-inducing mark, would essentially die out. I mean, they would be distinguished from the superhumans. They would just be these kind of second or third tier humans, or deemed that way by the government nations of this world. So it kind of made sense. And you know what? With all of the 5G talk and all of the technological advances that we're seeing happening in these past several years, just moving us in light speed towards some really amazing technological advances, this kind of made sense to me. And it answered those probing questions I had about whether or not, how do you get a populace to agree to such a mark? And of course, if this were true, then by default, people would eventually die out. And so the only people left would be those with the mark, the hybriders, those who are the superior superhumans. They would essentially live out and beyond the rest. Now, with this latest revelation, this pandemic we're dealing with, I'm having second thoughts and am leaning towards the likelihood that the mark of the beast is more of a tracking system designed not to distinguish the superhumans from the not superhumans, but designed to distinguish one group of citizens from another group of citizens for health reasons. For health reasons. And the fundamental basis by which this particular tracking system or mark would be implemented is an existential fear. Fear. You know, with the hybrid one, it's just pride. It's just inward focus. It's just this kind of, I want to be stronger. I want to be better. I want to live longer. I want to live forever. I don't want to get sick and all these things. Ever. I want to live the highest quality life that I can. So that makes sense. But under this paradigm, with this current situation, it's all based upon an existential fear. Indeed, this latest situation overrides the vast majority of people's hesitancy, or it would override people's hesitancy to getting such a tracking system implanted on or in them. One, fear of becoming infected from a highly contagious bug. Two, fear of not being able to provide for oneself and family if by chance they were to get this bug or they didn't get the tracking or the vaccination. And three, fear of not being able to move about society freely as a Westerner. These are all existential fears that people have that would cause them, it would prompt them, it would move them to getting this so-called marking system, this whatever you want to call it. And the governments of this world will finally have the vehicle, this tracking system, this thing by which they may assert absolute authority and power over their citizens without the risk of losing their offices or positions. For this will be seen as the governmental systems of the world showing their citizens that they do have their best interest at heart. Oh, after all, this is going to be seen by the vast majority of world citizens as the only solution to a worldwide medical emergency. Indeed, if such a tracking situation were to be deployed in the Western nations of this world, the true believers of this world who would choose to reject the tracking system, or also known as the mark, would be forced to undergo hell unless by chance those brethren have planned and figured out a way to operate effectively off the grid, so to speak. The Apostle Yochanan, also known as John in the Revelation, he received from our Master, Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua Messiah, described the mark of the beast this way. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. And the King James Version reads, "And he, the second beast, causeth all, this is Elizabethan English, causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand." I read this earlier, but it's good to read it again and really pick this apart. "Or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, one of the reasons most fundamentalists, and this is interesting, one of the reasons most fundamentalists have no real concern about this actually affecting them is because fundamental churchianity is primarily based on a pre-tribulation, sudden rapture understanding of the end times. Thus, churchianity has been sold, I would call it a bill of goods, that born-again believers in Jesus Christ will be out of here, snatched up to heaven for all eternity before such a thing like the mark of the beast takes place. So they don't have a concern. It doesn't matter to them. All you poor souls down here left behind, remember the Left Behind series? Well, you're going to end up being forced to get the mark, and you're going to go through literal hell. Well, the Torah observant disciple, or Torah observant disciples of Yeshua Messiah, clearly recognize, by virtue of their acceptance of the whole word of Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, and an understanding that those who are still alive at the time before the Great Tribulation, that Father, in other words, Father's judgments rained down upon the earth, will undergo great persecution and even tribulation that is brought on by the peoples of this world. In other words, when we're talking about tribulation, we have to be kind of specific, because Revelation does seem to talk about two types of tribulation. Everybody knows, or let's just say everybody has been taught about the Great Tribulation. And that's when everything goes haywire with the elements of the earth, the people getting sick, the waters going bad, the weather going bad, everything going to hell in a handbag. That's the tribulation that 90 some odd % of the people who know a little bit about, enough about the Bible to get themselves into trouble, they are familiar with that. But the other tribulation, the lesser known tribulation, has to do with the redeemed of Messiah undergoing their own tribulation. And in that sense, we're talking about the peoples and governments of this world tribulating the elect of Jehovah, causing widespread persecution, tribulation, and yes, even martyrdom. And that's the tribulation you won't hear much about because, again, churchianity has taught this pre-tribulation sudden rapture understanding of the end times. So in their minds, there's no such thing. There is no such thing as the elect of Yah being tribulated. The Sefer of Revelation was passed down to the apostle Yochanan, or John, for the Torah-observant disciples of Yeshua Messiah. It was not written and passed down to non-believers, nor fundamentalists. For no true lover of Jehovah's Torah would ever accept lawless, that is, without Torah, saints of the Most High being raptured up to heaven to escape persecution and tribulation. You see, our master Yeshua endured persecution and tribulation on our behalf. Great persecution and tribulation to death. And by virtue of our operating under the kingdom of Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah economy, no one is better than another. Yeshua warned his disciples that they, like him, would have to endure tribulation and persecution, and indeed they did. If you don't believe me, simply read Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it will become abundantly clear to you that many of Yeshua's disciples of the first couple centuries AD endured hellish torture and tribulation. And if you can stand to read the first several chapters of that book and not walk away profoundly affected, emotionally drained by reading that, then I don't know where your soul and your spirit is. I have shed many tears reading that book. And here we are in the West, big, dumb, fat, and happy, and we could care less about the people in the other parts of the world who are enduring horrid conditions because of the profession of their faith. Their faith in, well, for many of them, it's Jesus Christ, but nonetheless, they are being martyred. There are people out there being martyred. But the vast majority of us in the West enjoy our cozy little homes and getting online and watching really good-looking people dressed very nice in mega churches and just oozing wealth. And to them, that's true Christianity. But it's not. It's the further thing from it. It's the furthest thing from it. But you see, I digress. Yochanan, John, in the revelation that he received from Yeshua, recorded the following about those Torah-observant disciples of Messiah who are alive at the time of the end. He wrote, and this is in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, he wrote, "So the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed that keeps" what? "The commandments of Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, and has the testimony of Yeshua Messiah." Sound like anybody you know? Hallelujah. And further along the Sefer of Revelation, the book of Revelation, we read, and this is in Revelation chapter 6, verse 9. It's not further along, but it's kind of behind chapter 12. John writes, and when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of Jehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, and for the testimony which they held. So there's a lot of martyrdom going on. There's a lot of tribulation and persecution going on of elect, of the people who keep the commandments of Jehovah and possess the testimony of Yeshua Messiah. So I don't know how you just dismiss these things in your reading of the Revelation, the book of Revelation. I just don't get it. But somehow we have learned to do that. Many of us, I should say. And of course, also we read of the 144,000 who will be operating during the time of the end. So there's going to be a lot of activity going on with Yah's elect. If by chance we do, if by chance we do get to the end times, there's going to be a lot of us who are going to pay with our lives for the profession of our faith. Therefore, friends, if we truly belong to Jehovah and Yeshua Messiah, and we are still around in the last days, we are most certainly marked for tribulation, and many of us will be marked for martyrdom. Our faith is not a get-out-of-jail ticket for the end times. Instead, our faith will be the standard by which Jehovah's true children will be recognized. John wrote in Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of Jehovah and the faith of Yeshua." And here's the deal with those who acquiesce and take the mark of the beast. Revelation 16, verse 2. "And the first went and poured out his vial," the first being an angel, "poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image." Revelation 14, verses 9 through 11. "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." So getting any form of tracking, be it the actual mark of the beast when the time actually comes, or even the tracking system and vaccination that the powers that be today are proposing for the citizens of the world over this pandemic, cannot be an option for Torah-observant disciples of Yeshua Messiah. And the reasons are obvious and biblical, to say the least. So what? What do we do about this potentially dire situation? Well, we have to be prayed up. We have to be fasted up. We have to be studied up, ready for the dark days ahead. And when I say ready, be ready for the dark days ahead, I'm talking about making preparations the best way we know how and can. It seems the powers that be in our society today, as well as the Apostle John, have given us ample notice to prepare. They really have. They're talking about a vaccination and all of this stuff and maybe this tracking system coming online in about a year. So they've given us warning and they've given us a little bit of time to work with. So it's now up to us to ready ourselves for the potential consequences that will be inherent if we do not take the mark that the power brokers are proposing for the citizens of the world these days. For those of us who have means, such as land to grow food, or dwellings that are free and clear of debt, the ability to subsist without public utilities, and other such resources, well, it's time to prepare to go off the grid, I would say. And for those of us who are lacking in terms of means, such as that we lack the necessities to subsist off the grid, well, we probably need to start looking at cutting back on the things that are not of necessity and maybe stock up on necessities in anticipation for a prolonged period of time of lack. This most recent pandemic situation was an excellent rehearsal for this, because many of us found that we can subsist without the extras that we've grown accustomed to having in our present lives. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to learn some skills that many of us don't currently possess, such as maybe growing our own fruits and vegetables, such as raising Torah-sanctioned animals for food, such as currying favor with those around us who may have skills and resources we can tap into in times of need, such as clear our debt as much as possible under the present circumstances, such as be a part of a trustworthy network of brethren who we can work with in times of trouble. And I'm sure there are other ideas to be looked at in preparation that I haven't covered here. I am not an expert prepper. I don't know a whole lot about it. I've heard about it, but I don't know a lot about it. But I'm going to. I am going to start taking the steps towards preparing. And certainly our faith must be unshakable when we get down to the spiritual end of things. That's the physical I was just talking about. Well, what about the spiritual? Well, our faith must be unshakable. We must learn to rely upon Father to guide us through the bad times ahead, to grant us wisdom and knowledge and grace to navigate these coming perilous times. And of course, it goes without saying, we must ask Yah for unshakable courage to stand up to the power brokers who will attempt to enforce the taking of such a mark. So may you be ever so ready for the sobering days ahead of us, regardless if this thing turns out to be the real book of Revelation mark of the beast, regardless whether or not it turns out to be a precursor of the real thing or just a well-crafted threat designed to test the public's willingness to comply to such a tracking system. We must be prepared regardless, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically for the fallout that's sure to come from Mr. Gates' alleged proposal. As I always try to get across to everyone who hears the content of this program, none of this is about us. All of this, however, is about Him, Yehovah, our Elohim. So, I would say take everything that I've just said here and give it some thought. And it's up to you. And it's up to me to make the tough decision, if by chance this does come to fruition, or something like it comes to fruition. We just have to be ready to do that which we are compelled to do, whether it is to acquiesce and give in to the whims of the government, or we stand up to the government. Stand up to the enemy. Stand up to everyone else in our community, the secular community, who will no doubt have problems with us not acquiescing to the terms of the government. To family, friends. Some of us may lose jobs if we don't take this so-called tracking system. I mean, there's a whole lot that we can talk about. It's obvious. I don't need to go over it. You know as well as I do the ramifications of not acquiescing. So it's a tough decision. And the question is, are you ready to make that tough call? In all things, regardless, let us give our Elohim the praise, glory, and honor he so justly deserves. And I'm done. I think I've stated my case. May you, your families, and fellowships stay well and abundantly blessed during this very, very interesting time in our history. Shalom. Take care.